Have you ever noticed how some people seem to possess this quiet power? They don't demand attention. They don't constantly react. They simply withdraw.
Mm.
And suddenly, the world around them goes into a bit of a tailspin. People who are used to having access get uncomfortable. The energy shifts, like, dramatically. Why does it happen?
It's a fascinating observation, isn't it? It really highlights just how much we operate based on the availability, the predictability of others.
Right.
When that constant access is suddenly pulled back, it just throws that whole system into disarray.
Exactly, into disarray. And that dynamic is what this deep dive is all about. What happens internally and externally when you stop being perpetually available emotionally, physically, psychologically.
Yeah.
It's not about becoming a hermit or turning your back on the world necessarily. It's more about making a conscious choice about where your vital energy flows. It's about choosing yourself.
And we're exploring this through the lens of a really insightful piece of material that draws heavily on Carl Jung's ideas. It gives us a powerful framework for understanding these shifts.
Yeah, a really useful framework. Our mission today is to unpack the surprising insights hidden within this material. Why do so many of us fall into excessive availability? What are the hidden costs? And what's the unexpected power grounded in these Jungian concepts like psychic energy and individuation that comes from conscious unavailability and maybe embracing silence?
We'll definitely get into how being overly available can feel like a kind of internal prison, how it profoundly impacts your energy levels,
Right.
why others might react really strongly when you start to change that pattern, and how reclaiming your presence involves understanding these complex ideas about the persona and psychological projection.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The material we're looking at kicks off with that compelling image. The world reacting with crisis when someone becomes less available. It suggests that for many people, control over others comes through knowing their reactions, their impulses, their predictability.
Yeah, it's like they've learned your emotional triggers, haven't they? Your automatic responses.
Totally.
They know if they push this button, you'll react in that way. It creates a subtle, or sometimes not so subtle, sense of leverage.
But then, when you choose to withdraw, even just a little bit, the material points out the game changes.
The whole dynamic shifts.
Those who thought they had you all figured out, precisely because they relied on your predictable reactions, suddenly confront the fact that, well, maybe they didn't know the real you at all.
And this is where that famous insight from Jung resonates so deeply, as highlighted in this material. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves.
Okay, break that down a bit.
Well, think about it. When you become less accessible, less reactive, who shows their irritation? Who gets desperate? Who starts trying to provoke you?
Right, you see their reaction.
Yeah. Exactly. It's uncomfortable to see, maybe, but the point made is clear. Their strong reaction reveals far more about them and how much they might have been operating from a place of subtle manipulation, just relying on your constant output.
Because you've been conditioned, maybe, to just give yourself away.
That's often it. Saying forced yeses, providing immediate responses, getting drawn into emotional reactions, often out of a desire to please or to keep the peace.
Or just to avoid losing people.
Right, people who perhaps were never truly connected to you in the first place, but more to what you provided for them.
And the cost is immense, isn't it? Every force, yes,
Sure.
Every instant reply, every automatic emotional reaction. The material argues, it just drains your energy.
Totally. And what's left at the end of the day is that familiar exhaustion, frustration, maybe a sense of inner emptiness.
Yeah.
The material is quite blunt about it. You're too available for people who simply don't deserve even a minute of your conscious, quiet presence.
Wow. That's a sharp reframe. Because we've been taught the exact opposite, haven't we? Conditioned from childhood, maybe, to link our worth to our availability, be present, respond quickly, try to please everyone, always say yes.
And this material just states it unequivocally. Excessive availability is not a virtue. It is a prison.
A prison. Yeah, that resonates. Because being constantly available makes you predictable. And anything predictable or anyone predictable can easily become, well, a tool.
Exactly. There's a powerful metaphor used. You become an emotional emergency button for others.
Okay.
They press you for validation, for comfort, for distraction when they need it, and then
Back on the shelf.
they put you back on the shelf when they're done.
Right.
Until next time.
And the trap is believing that if you're just available enough for everyone else, someone will finally be truly present for you.
But this material pushes back hard against that illusion. It says flat out,
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
This connects so strongly to Jung's concept of the persona, which this material brings into play.
Right, the persona.
The mask we wear for the world, that public face we cultivate, hoping for acceptance, love, recognition.
And this mask, this deep desire to be liked or just fit in,
Hmm.
often demands that you be overly available. It's that part of you that says, oh, it's okay, when you're actually suffering inside.
Or the impulse to respond to messages instantly, even when you're totally depleted.
Yeah, or the feeling that you have to constantly explain or justify yourself as if you somehow owe the world an apology just for existing or having needs.
And the fundamental problem this creates, the more you try to be the star of everyone else's show, the more you disappear from your own. It's a powerful line.
Yeah.
This perspective frames constant availability as a subtle form of self-abandonment.
Self-abandon, okay.
It's like a disguised attempt to seek external approval or avoid rejection or desperately try to control the image others have of you.
And the price you pay for that perceived control or acceptance is incredibly high. Your inner peace and your vital energy, which, contrary to how we often live, is not infinite, which leads to a point in the material that might sound a bit harsh but feels crucial.
Okay.
Often, the people who demand your constant availability don't actually want you. They want what you provide. Maybe it's validation, a listening ear, a distraction, emotional comfort. You're serving a function for them.
So when you start to shift, when you set a boundary, when you choose not to automatically react, how do those same people respond?
Well, the material notes, they often become irritated, accusatory,
Right.
telling you that you've changed or you're being weird.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
And it's not, as this analysis points out, because you've somehow become a worse person. It's because you've stopped being functional for them in the way they were used to.
Wow. Stop being functional for them. That lands. And then there's this striking statement. The more available you are, the less value others give you.
Yeah, it uses this really blunt metaphor. What is too abundant becomes emotional rag.
Like a disposable cloth.
Exactly. Like a cloth you use and discard because it's always there. People tend not to respect what they don't have to earn or value what is just given freely all the time.
That really flips the script on how we think about availability, doesn't it? It's not just politeness. It's linked to perceived value and this whole energy exchange thing.
Which brings us right to the core engine behind all of this, what Carl Jung called psychic energy.
Okay, let's talk about psychic energy.
Yes, this material really shifts focus to this fundamental concept.
Yeah.
Jung viewed the human psyche not just as some mechanical reactor, but as a dynamic energy system.
An energy system.
Yeah. Every thought, every emotion, every action requires and consumes this internal energy.
And the critical question this raises for you listening right now is, are you consciously choosing where that precious energy goes? Or are you just letting the external world constantly dictate its direction?
Because, as the material details, so much of our energy is simply leaked or wasted. Well, think about impulsive reactions. Getting defensive over criticism that doesn't really matter. Jumping into arguments just to be right. Engaging in futile discussions, pouring energy into trying to please people who clearly don't value you. All that stuff.
It really echoes that Jungian idea that which you resist persists.
Exactly. The more energy you spend reacting against something, the more bound you become to it. You actually reinforce the very dynamic you think you're fighting.
So this material describes drained people not as inherently weak.
No, not weak, but misdirected. Their energy is just going the wrong places. They become vulnerable, kind of easy targets for manipulative or opportunistic individuals because they signal that they don't guard their energy.
How do they signal that?
They react to every bait, they try to fix everything for everyone, and others learn they can just easily tap into that supply whenever they want.
Okay, so what's the alternative? What's a healthy psyche look like from this perspective?
From Jung's perspective, as presented here, it's one that knows how to maintain its energy within the system.
Keep it contained.
Right. This means knowing how to say no without crippling guilt, understanding when silence is actually a strength rather than a weakness, and cultivating the ability to observe and assess a situation before automatically plunging into action or reaction.
So true power isn't in the immediate response.
No, it's in the conscious choice of when and how to respond. And that takes significant self-awareness.
It really does. Just think about the sheer amount of energy drained daily. How many hours have you lost sleep replaying some conversation?
Oh, yeah. or ruminating on why someone said something, trying to dissect their motivations for hours.
That analysis argues that's pure energy drain with zero return. You're essentially keeping ghosts alive, feeding dynamics that would just cease to exist if you simply stopped engaging, stopped pouring your life force into them.
hmm There's a powerful analogy used in the material. Your psychic energy is like a force field.
Okay, a force field.
When it's well maintained, when you're managing it consciously, it creates presence. You can enter a space and command attention, not through noise, but through a quiet, self-possessed energy.
But when it's poorly managed, constantly leaking out.
Then you become almost invisible, easily reactive, fragile, and the point is made pretty starkly. The world has no mercy for those who give in easily, because their energy is just seen as up for grabs.
So a practical step here, straight from the material. Start observing your own triggers. What makes you react automatically, without thinking? Where do you feel that familiar pull to jump in, defend yourself, or explain?
Those, the material suggests, are precisely the points where your energy is escaping. That's where the work lies. Not to become cold or detached, but to cultivate a discerning selectivity, to become truly sovereign over yourself.
Sovereign over yourself. I like that. Now, this is where the Jungian insights in this material get even more complex, maybe a bit unsettling. When you start conserving your energy, when you step back from being automatically available and reactive, you inherently start disrupting the projections others place upon you.
And according to this analysis, that is profoundly uncomfortable for them. This is where we touch upon what the material calls the territory of subtle or silent manipulation.
Violent manipulation. Okay.
You might think your reactions are always conscious choices, but this material posits a more challenging truth.
Yeah.
Many of our emotional responses are deeply programmed, almost automatic, and people who recognize this, consciously or unconsciously, can exploit it. They don't need threats or shouting. Opportunistic individuals simply learn to trigger the emotional buttons you've left exposed, and you react, predictably, on autopilot.
This links back to Jung's concept of projection, that unconscious act of disowning parts of ourselves by attributing them to others.
Yes, but this material emphasizes the flip side. While others are projecting onto you, you become the receptacle for those projections.
The landing pad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the more emotionally available, the more blank canvas you present, the more easily those projections land on you and stick.
Can you give some examples?
Sure, the material highlights things like the friend who only reaches out when they're in crisis, the partner who seems perpetually stuck needing to be saved, the person whose praise always feels conditional on you fulfilling a specific role for them.
Okay, I see.
The point being made is they often aren't relating to the real you. They are relating to the idea of you, the comfortable, functional role you've slipped into, because maybe deep down, you're afraid of disappointing them, not being loved or being abandoned.
And this is where the silent manipulation thrives.
Exactly. It doesn't require yelling. It operates in that insidious silence of guilt, that feeling that you owe this person your availability, that you need to help or explain or understand, even when it's destroying you internally.
So the manipulator's goal isn't necessarily to control your whole life.
No, it's often simpler. They just need you to keep reacting in that familiar, predictable way that serves their needs.
But here's the power shift this material describes. When you stop reacting,
You break the pattern.
you disrupt the game. When you begin to say no, maybe to respond with silence, to withdraw instead of justifying yourself, those projections others placed on you start to crumble. The mask they put on you falls away.
And the material is clear. This is deeply unsettling for others. They no longer know who you are or how to interact with this new you. And crucially, it forces them to do something many desperately try to avoid.
Regis.
Look at themselves. And not everyone is willing or prepared for that kind of self-reflection.
So your decreased availability becomes like an unwelcome mirror.
Precisely. It forces others to confront their own internal emptiness, maybe the noise they've been successfully avoiding, by focusing all their energy or neediness onto you.
And what's the typical response when that happens?
Often, attack, criticism, emotional drama. But as this material stresses, it's usually not because you are objectively wrong or bad. It's because you've stopped functioning as their convenient mirror or their go-to emotional resource.
This echoes another profound Jungian idea highlighted in the material. We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious.
Yeah, how does that connect?
Well, when you withdraw your constant availability, when you stop feeding that projection-reaction cycle, the material suggests the other's shadow, their unacknowledged issues, their darkness, begins to emerge.
And that forced confrontation with their own shadow side is often unbearable for those who have relied on using you as an escape from themselves.
Right. Okay.
The material then puts a crucial question directly to you, the listener. Are you prepared for the inevitable discomfort that comes with protecting your energy?
That discomfort of being misunderstood, maybe rejected, even attacked.
Yeah. Are you ready to endure the silence that comes after the rupture? Because this analysis suggests that very silence is where a new kind of power is born.
Okay, let's talk about this power of silence. In
Yeah.
a world that's just drowning in noise, right? In constant calls for immediate response and everyone shouting to be heard, conscious, strategic silence feels almost revolutionary. The material calls it brutally lucid silence.
It's not the silence of passivity or fear, right?
Oh.
It's framed as silence as amplified presence. Jung apparently saw silence not as just an absence or a void, but as fertile ground for inner transformation.
How so? Fertile ground.
Well, when you disengage from the constant need to react, you begin to simply observe more. And in that observation, you start seeing patterns you missed before, maybe manipulation tactics, your own self-sabotaging responses, those repetitive emotional loops you get stuck in. Silence, this analysis points out, brings lucidity, clarity.
And lucidity clarity is a direct threat to anyone who benefits from keeping you in a state of unconscious reaction.
Absolutely. Have you noticed, as this material asks, how panicked some people become when you don't immediately respond, when you don't explain yourself, when you just withdraw your energy?
Yeah, it can be quite dramatic.
And it's often not because they genuinely miss you, but because your silence takes away their narrative control.
Narrative control. Okay.
As long as you're speaking, reacting, explaining, you're kind of playing within their rules, on their stage. When you become silent, you fundamentally change the game, and that throws those who thrive on your predictable reaction completely off balance.
So true silence, from this perspective, is a form of mastery over your own energy.
Exactly. It's a conscious refusal to be pulled into someone else's emotional chaos. It's choosing not to engage in battles that are simply not worth the cost to your peace.
And you mentioned Jung connecting this to individuation.
Yes, Jung suggested that individuation, that lifelong process of becoming a whole, unique self, by integrating aspects of your conscious and unconscious, often requires this kind of distancing. Because, he argued, only in silence, away from the world's constant demands and projections, can you truly begin to hear the quiet voice of your own being, your own truth.
But this path isn't without cost, right? The material acknowledges the price.
Definitely. It will likely distance you from people who only valued you for a specific role you played. It will make you seem incomprehensible, maybe, to those who only saw you through their own projected needs.
You might get labeled cold, distant, or even arrogant.
You might. But, crucially, this analysis reframes those reactions. They are their discomfort, their reaction to encountering a depth and self-possession in you they never wanted to see because, frankly, they prefer the shallow, always available version.
There's a hard truth presented here. The more you mature, the more selective you naturally become with your words. Why?
Because you start to understand that each sentence, each engagement, is an energetic investment.
Yeah.
And frankly, not everyone warrants or deserves access to your truth or your energy.
So sometimes silence isn't retreat, it's sovereignty.
Exactly. It's the quiet language of someone who no longer needs external validation or feels the need to prove anything to anyone.
And this sovereignty, this intentional silence, is deeply uncomfortable for others precisely because it forces them back onto themselves to deal with their own internal noise and emptiness.
Right. Their discomfort, the material argues, speaks louder about them than any argument you could ever offer in your own defense.
And you don't? The material stresses need to justify your absence or explain your silence?
No. It explains itself to those who have the capacity to see. And those who feel threatened by it inadvertently reveal just how much they depended on your lack of boundaries, your imbalance, to maintain their own sense of control or comfort.
But the most powerful silence, according to this deep dive, isn't necessarily the one that disturbs others.
No, the most powerful silence is the one that serves to reconstruct you from within.
Reconstruct you.
Yeah. It's the silence that connects you to something far deeper and more stable than just external approval. It's in this internal space, free from the constant demands and noise of others, that you can begin to genuinely reclaim your vital energy and reconnect with your authentic essence.
As this material points out, though, understanding this intellectually is just the first step.
Right. Intellect is not enough. True transformation requires action. You have to actually become selective in practice, and this demands real emotional discipline.
So conscious unavailability isn't about being uncaring or indifferent.
Not at all. It's about no longer being automatically accessible to just anyone at any time for any reason. It's taking back control of your most valuable resources,
Mm.
your energy, your time, and your inner peace. And this begins with small, intentional actions.
Like what? What are some small actions?
Well, like not responding to a message the absolute instant it arrives, taking a breath, a real pause before you react to something triggering,
Okay.
consciously choosing to leave a discussion before it spirals into unproductive chaos,
Hmm.
feeling empowered to turn off your phone without feeling guilty about it.
And saying no.
Yes, saying no or I'm not interested or simply I won't get involved without feeling that compulsive need to justify it endlessly.
And this point is so important it bears repeating, as the material does. You don't need to justify your absence. You owe nothing to anyone but yourself.
That is profoundly liberating, isn't it?
Mm.
Because it removes others' power to keep you trapped in an old emotional narrative where you were always the endlessly helpful, understanding, accessible person they expected you to be.
This path of conscious unavailability, the material connects back again to Jung's process of individuation.
Right. And it often involves a period of isolation, but not necessarily a lonely, depressive kind. It's described more as a sacred isolation.
The sacred isolation. Explain that.
It's like a necessary internal retreat, a space where you learn to listen to your own quiet inner voice without the overwhelming interference of the world's expectations and noise. It's about rebuilding your identity from your own core, rather than constantly shaping it based on the shifting gaze of others.
Want a practical thermometer for your progress on this path.
Okay.
This material suggests observing who distances themselves from you when you become more reserved. Notice who tries harder to provoke you when you stop giving them the reaction they expect. Pay attention to who accuses you of changing when you start protecting your peace.
And these reactions, according to this perspective, are rarely a sign that you're doing something wrong.
Right.
Instead, they're often compelling proof that you are successfully freeing yourself from old, draining dynamics.
And it's completely natural for this shift to feel uncomfortable at first. You might feel guilty or selfish or harsh. People might even tell you that you are those things.
And that discomfort is validated here. It's part of dismantling years, maybe decades, of old conditioning. You've likely spent so long prioritizing others' perceived needs over your own. It's bound to feel strange, even wrong, initially.
Yeah.
And yes, it will cause discomfort, not just in you, but in everyone who benefited from the old version of you, the overly available you.
Conscious unavailability, this analysis argues, is actually the bedrock of self-determination.
How so?
When you find the strength to say no to the world's incessant demands, you are simultaneously saying a profound yes to yourself, to your own needs. Withdrawing from toxic dynamics isn't coldness. It's a powerful affirmation that your peace and integrity matter more than maintaining a false connection. And stopping the endless explanations is the first step toward earning genuine respect, maybe even from yourself first.
But you have to be prepared for rupture. Your increasing emotional absence will inevitably highlight and expose the unhealed wounds and dependence in others, especially those who relied heavily on your availability to avoid facing their own issues.
And the material doesn't shy away from this. This exposure can lead to rupture, real pain, loneliness, estrangement. It can feel like you are losing something vital.
When in fact, from this viewpoint, you are finally freeing yourself from what was holding you back.
But what emerges from that necessary distance? What is born from that silence, that rupture?
The material describes it as a profound rebirth.
A rebirth. Okay.
It speaks of the loneliness of the strong as the authentic path to freedom. That initial silence after withdrawal can be uncomfortable, maybe even deafening. You might doubt yourself, question your choices, fear you're losing important connections.
That sounds tough.
It can be. But gradually that silence transforms. It becomes cleansing, a space for healing, calming. And then it deepens into solitude. But not the solitude of absence.
No.
The solitude of total presence your own. This is the solitude of the strong. The solitude of someone who no longer betrays their own needs and truth just to keep others nearby.
So in the space where confusion once reigned, clarity blossoms.
Exactly. Where anxiety was maybe constant, a deep peace settles in. Where neediness felt unbearable, a new, solid strength takes root, the strength of being whole, complete, and enough right within yourself.
It goes back to Jung again.
Yes, Jung believed the process of individuation, becoming your authentic self, requires distancing yourself from the pressures of the collective, shedding that artificial persona, and being willing to walk alone for a time if necessary.
And this material argues that's precisely what happens when you consciously choose unavailability. You're not abandoning the world. You are finally truly returning to yourself.
This is the fundamental shift from being primarily a reactor, constantly shaped and pulled by external circumstances and demands, to
Becoming a creator, someone who shapes their reality from an inner core of self-possession and choice.
and those people who are uncomfortable with your absence, who maybe fall away.
Yeah.
This material suggests they are revealing that they didn't actually want you.
Wow.
They wanted the predictable role you played, the function you served, and now that you've stepped out of that role, they no longer know how to engage with the real you.
And viewed from this perspective, that's incredibly liberating, isn't it?
It really is. Yes, you may lose some people, but you gain yourself. You distance yourself from places and dynamics that drained you, but you reconnect with your deepest essence. You might become misunderstood by many, but for the first time, you will begin to be truly respected, even if it's only by a select few who see the real you.
Because when you are no longer endlessly available for just anything,
You become, paradoxically, valuable, rare, and deeply present to those who genuinely see and value you for who you are, not just what you do for them.
this material concludes is a rebirth, a genuine new beginning.
Stepping into a life where you're no longer available for emotional crumbs, for mind games, for voids disguised as affection. You learn to accept only what genuinely resonates with your hard-won peace, your authentic truth, and your inner wholeness.
True self-love, this analysis powerfully states, begins the moment you choose yourself, even, or perhaps especially, if that choice means spending some time alone to rediscover who that self truly is.
Powerful idea.
So we've taken quite a deep dive into this compelling idea that excessive availability is less a virtue and more a kind of self-imposed prison.
Yeah, we really unpacked that.
We've explored how it drains your vital psychic energy, why others might react so strongly when you shift, and how this connects to those Jungian concepts like the persona and projection.
And maybe most importantly, we've looked at the transformative power of conscious unavailability and silence, even when it leads to that necessary period of sacred isolation on the path toward individuation and rebirth.
This exploration really offers some powerful insights, I think, to understand why constant availability is so draining.
Absolutely. And it provides a framework rooted in these Jungian ideas to maybe navigate relationships and just the constant information overload by becoming far more selective with your energy, your attention, your presence.
It's about gaining knowledge on personal boundaries and psychological dynamics in a way that feels incredibly relevant to daily life, you know?
Definitely relevant.
Okay, so based on everything we've discussed about reclaiming your psychic energy and making conscious choices, here's a final thought for you to sit with.
Okay.
What one small automatic reaction could you choose not to have today, just today, to reclaim just a little piece of your precious energy for yourself?